Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today we're going to do a video that I did not plan on making at all, but that's one of my favorite things about having this channel is that sometimes it goes in unexpected ways. About a month ago I got this controller in the mail. It's called the GameSir G8 Plus, and essentially this is just a Bluetooth controller that you would strap onto like a phone or a tablet. And essentially it's just the wireless version of another controller I've already reviewed on this channel before. This one is called the G8 Galileo. And as expected, the main difference here is that this one uses a USB-C connection, while the G8 Plus is a Bluetooth controller. And so I figured this would be a very simple video to make. I would just basically test that yes, it's wireless and sure, it works. But this is where things get very interesting, because this essentially is the best controller I've ever used for the Nintendo Switch. Not only does it have all the features I would want in a Switch controller, including 6-axis gyro, but it also feels like it's been perfectly designed for the Nintendo Switch. All of the lines and everything just line up perfectly. And so, as I'm going to demonstrate in this video, you can totally use this with your phone or your tablet in the ways that you can with any other telescopic controller, but this right here is the best Switch controller I've ever used. In fact, this controller is so good, I've been using my Switch in handheld mode more than ever before, and so I'm pretty excited to show this off, and without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, I think we should start by talking about the GameSir G8 Galileo. I reviewed this one last year, and this remains my favorite all-around telescopic controller, just because it has basically console-sized controls and a really sturdy package. Now this is USB-C connected, so no battery or anything else like that. You would just connect your phone or your tablet and then use it like that. And I love the Super Nintendo aesthetics of it, and also the Xbox-style controls. This is a really excellent fit if you're going to be like game streaming with your phone. It also has a couple nice quirks to it. For example, you can pull off these top covers and you can change out the button configuration if you'd like. So if you want to have the A button on the right, it's just a simple swap. In addition, these Hall effect stick caps just come right out, so you can swap these out for different shapes, and it also has Hall sensor triggers too. In addition, this has been on sale a lot over the past year or so, and so even though it does cost $80, you can often find it on Amazon for a lot cheaper. Another really smart thing that GameSir has done with this controller is they've licensed it out to other companies. So for example, this one is from GameStop. It is called the Raptor 8. And this was actually sent over to me from GameStop themselves. They sent me an email and said, hey, we loved your G8 review, you should check out this one too. And I don't know about you, but I've been deleting emails from GameStop for like 20 years, and so I almost deleted that one, but then I realized it was from like GameStop, not actually just a promo email. Anyway, the major change with the GameStop Raptor 8 is that we have a new color scheme, and then they've also changed out a lot of the marketing materials. But as you can see inside the box, this is almost identical to the G8 Galileo experience, other than the fact that the controller is a little bit different. And I do really like the color scheme here. Not only is it nice and sleek with the black coloring, but then I like the red accents too. And I also think it's cool that they've incorporated both the Xbox and PlayStation button configurations. And because this controller works so well with streaming, I think this is great. You can stream your PlayStation games, your Xbox games, and you'll know which button does what. Now, connecting this to your phone or tablet is super simple. You just would plug it in using that USB-C port. From there, the controller will extend with a spring mechanism, and so that's how you connect everything. And once you have it connected, the red accents are very subtle. They're just going to be on each side. And that's all there really is to it. It's really just a plug-and-play experience, one of my favorite ways to play mobile games on the go. And so long story short, I love the GameSir G8 Galileo. I also appreciate the fact that we have different color options as well. So thanks to GameStop for sending this over so I could check it out. And like I mentioned, when I got the G8 Plus in the mail, I thought it'd be a super simple review. I basically would just look at the differences between the wireless version and the wired one that we have with the G8 Galileo. But of course, as soon as I started digging down that rabbit hole, I found all sorts of fun things to talk about. So let's talk about what's different between the new G8 Plus and the older one. And first and foremost, this is a wireless controller. We now have Bluetooth connection, but in various different forms. If we look at the instruction manual, you can see there are 4 different connectivity options. We have the Android version, which is just going to be your standard D input. And then we've also got what they call DS4. And this essentially is going to be an X input that'll work for both Android and iOS. We also have a switch mode, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And then what they also call G-Touch. That's going to be for touchscreen mapping. So right off the bat, that's going to be your connectivity options. You can use this to connect to Android, either phone or tablet, then same thing with an iPhone or an iPad. And then if you're playing a mobile game that has touchscreen input only, you'll be able to map that using the GameSir app as well. Now, in addition to the Switch stuff that we'll talk about here in a moment, it does have a USB-C port. Now, this is essentially made for charging, but you can also use this wired. So if you did want to use this as like a big, wide controller to connect to your PC, you can absolutely do that as well through the USB-C port. There are some really nice touches to this as well. For example, you can see that there's a little separator between the two rubber pads here on the back. And that's because if you would like, you can just rip out this rubber part. That's going to give you more space for your phone's camera bump if you're going to use it that way. So that already gives you a leg up when it comes to using a phone that has a case on it. Now for me personally, I haven't found that it gets in the way enough to remove that rubber bumper. For example, here with my iPhone, which does have a case on it, there's still a little bit of a camera bump. And yes, it would get a little bit smaller if I pulled off that rubber backing. But in general, I think it does fit fairly balanced. Yes, this part's going to be a little bit higher than the other. You can do one of two things. You can either just pull off that right side or just leave it a little uneven. Personally, I don't like the idea of potentially damaging the device by pulling off that rubber thing, so I just leave it as it is and it works fine. Now another added change to the GameSir G8 Plus is that it now extends wider than it did previously. This is kind of a feat of strength right here, so I don't know how long I can do it, but you can see that yes, the G8 Plus is wider than the other. And why that's important is because it now works with smaller tablets. For example, an iPad mini. I don't have one of those to test with, but I do have this one. This one's called the Aldo Cube. This is an Android-based tablet that costs about $150, and you can find it on sale for even cheaper very often. This one has a Helio G99 chipset inside, which is going to be really great all the way up to some GameCube and PS2. In fact, it's the same processor as the Neo Pocket Micro, which I reviewed just last week. And so if you want to know what the performance is going to be like, you can check out that video. But the main point here is that the G8 Plus now extends large enough to be able to accommodate this tablet as well. And so if you have an older iPad mini or maybe an Android tablet, you want to transform it into a gaming console, this is going to be an excellent fit right here. Another nice thing about this screen is that it is a 16:10 aspect ratio. That means it's going to be a little bit taller than your traditional 16:9. This means when playing 4:3 content, for example with NES, that's going to give us a lot more space to work with, and the black bars are going to be a little bit minimized. Also, while we're here, let's do a quick contra test. Now this is a clicky D-pad, which means that when I press it down and I rock it left and right, it's not going to move at all. In fact, the only way to get the character to move is to move it so far that it clicks one way or the other. What this means is we have really tactile controls. It's very precise. I like having this kind of feedback. So when it comes to precision platformers, things like Contra, this is going to be excellent. It almost feels like a cross between a retro and a PS Vita D-pad. It's nice and clicky. I really like it. Long story short, if you are looking for a controller to be able to use with a smaller tablet, then the GameSir G8 Plus is going to be an excellent fit. I also think that you would really enjoy playing game streaming on a big screen like this as well. So if you wanted to make like your own PS Portal, you could do something like that too. So yes, I think this is an excellent feature on the G8 Plus, the fact that it extends so wide that you can fit it with a tablet. As a comparison, here is the G8 Plus, and even when extending it all the way, there's still about a ½ inch of clearance that it needs. Now it is possible to mod this controller. You can basically cut these plastic strips right here. That'll allow you to extend it beyond what they have originally planned. But personally, I don't like the idea of doing something irreversible to my controller, so I've never done that mod. I've just kind of waited for the Bluetooth one to come out. And so that's a major difference between these two. This one is more tablet friendly than the original G8. And in terms of just overall design, it's almost identical. The only difference I've seen between just the overall controls between these two are the fact that the buttons feel a little bit different on the G8 Plus. The original G8 has these really nice rubber membrane buttons, and they feel very good. They remind me a lot of an Xbox controller, so nice and tactile, but still a little bit mushy. And the G8 Plus feels very similar, although I would say these buttons are a little bit lighter to the touch. They take a little bit less force to press down. In addition, they have a bit of a more switchy kind of feel to them in the sense that they're not quite as mushy. They just bounce right back. And so honestly, I think these are both basically neck and neck in terms of just overall feel, but I do like these a little bit better. They're lighter to the touch and just feel more precise. Everything else seems to be the same. So we've got our start and select buttons here. We've got a screenshot button, then our M button. This is used for mapping and whatnot. And then we have our GameSir, or what I like to call the chicken button. So this one will do all sorts of things. It'll turn on the controller. You can press it and hold it to turn it off. And then also you can press this button plus one of the face buttons to change out the input. So for example, if you want it to be Switch, you would press these two buttons. If you want it to be Android, you would press these two. Now the texture on the sides of the device has got this rubberized kind of feel to it. It is very nice. Again, very much like an Xbox controller. We've also got two buttons on the back which are programmable. You can either just do this directly on the device by pressing the M button and then one of these and then mapping it to whatever you would like. Or if you'd like, you can use the GameSir Android or iOS app to set it up manually. On the bottom, we've got our Bluetooth pairing button, then our USB-C port. But this controller has two different batteries, 1000 milliamp hours altogether, but 500 on each side. And the way this works is that when you plug it in, both sides are going to charge, but only when it's in this compact state. For example, if you had a phone connected like this, and then you plugged it in to charge it, it would only charge the right side because it's extended. And so if you are going to be charging this often, then I would recommend taking the phone or other thing out and then charging it this way instead. And then finally, let's talk about these shoulder and trigger buttons. These are exactly the same as they were before. So these are very similar to an Xbox controller, and I love the inputs here. And that's always been one of my favorite things about these G8 controllers. They basically feel like an Xbox controller, but with something in the middle. And so this has always been one of my favorite ways to use a phone or a tablet because it just feels like a console. Now, the whole crux of this video is the Nintendo Switch, because this is the one use case that I think really shines with the G8 Plus. And given the recent drama that I've had with Nintendo, I just want to make it very clear here, I'm just using an original Switch. No Nintendos were harmed in the making of this video. Now, when it comes to the Switch, I've got 4 of these altogether. I've got 2 OLEDs. This is one of them right here. The other one's used by the kids. And then I also have an OG Switch, which is this one right here. And then I've got a Switch Lite as well. And I gotta be honest, I rarely use the Nintendo Switch other than the Switch Lite in handheld mode, and that's because it's just kind of a pain to actually use. When I'm using my Switch out and about, I often will use this thing. This is the Spigen Grip. And this is very lightweight and just essentially latches onto the device, but the thing I like about it is that it gives me a little bit more of an ergonomic bump. And the thing I like about this setup is that it does feel a lot like the original Switch, just a little bit more elevated because of these grips. And so if I'm going to be going on travel or something like that, I really like using this just because it's so compact and easy to take around. But at the same time, because I mostly do focus on handheld gaming, I've always been looking for the best way to be able to use my Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. I have tried a bunch of different solutions and I've never been happy with any of them. For example, a lot of people talk about these Satisfy grips, and these were actually sent over by the company to test out. And this essentially is just a grip attachment. So you slide it in with your Joy-Cons and everything, and it just gives you some more ergonomic grips to work with. And I think these feel good, but they're also a little bit contradictory because they feel kind of like a console. You have this big grip, but then also you just have the original controls to work with. And if you've watched any of my other videos, I do not like the original Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. I think they do not have enough of a range of motion. And so these Satisfy grips have always felt like a half measure to me. Yes, it makes it more ergonomic to hold, but it doesn't improve the actual controls. If I'm going to be making my Switch this big, then I want the entire experience to be elevated, and this is just kind of halfway there. I've also never really appreciated the stands that we have right here. I think they look a little bit gaudy. It's almost like we have fangs on my Switch. Now, they do work great. You can prop up your device, no problem whatsoever, but the thing is, with the Switch OLED in particular, you've got all this space for the kickstand, and so if I've already got a kickstand, what do I need a stand for as well? So thank you to Satisfy for sending this over, but this is just not something that really jives with the way that I play. Now, another option worth considering is just changing out the Joy-Cons themselves. For example, I have these guys right here, and I'm not really sure the name of the brand. These were actually sent over with a different device. It was for like a streaming device, and I just kept them for my Nintendo Switch. I really like them. These do have a good combination of giving you more ergonomic grips and then also larger analog sticks, and so I've just really appreciated that as well. But I've also never been truly satisfied with this one either, because the buttons and the D-pad feel a little bit cheap. But this is definitely an unexplored avenue for me. I've got a couple of these different types of grips, but I know that there are a bunch of other companies that make these as well. And my favorite among the Joy-Con replacements are going to be this one. This is the Hori Split Pad Compact. What I like about this one is that it is relatively small, but does give me nice ergonomic grips. And these controls are very good. These sticks are larger and roomier, and then it also has a nice solid kind of mushy D-pad and face button as well. In addition, these are not wireless controllers, which means they don't have batteries in them and they are super lightweight. And so for a while, if I was going to be playing the Nintendo Switch in handheld mode while at home, this is the one that I like to use the most. It's a little bit wider, which means it won't fit in a standard Nintendo Switch case, but I think it's really great to be able to use at home. Now, in addition to Joy-Con replacements, we can also use the nuclear option, which is to use a full-on shell for our Nintendo Switch. And this is a controller made by a company called Retroflag. This was also sent to me for review several years back. Now, there are a couple things I really like about this one. For example, it has that GameCube aesthetic to it, and I think that's really awesome. In addition, I don't really have any complaints about the controls either. I think that the D-pad's a little bit on the mushy side, but the buttons are nice and tactile too. The main reason why I don't use this one as much as the others is because you cannot dock it with this controller. You've got to pull it all the way out. Now, it does have USB-C pass-through charging, so if you wanted to charge it via a cable, you can definitely do that. But one of my favorite things about the Switch is that I can just throw it in the dock and it'll charge and be ready for the next time I play it. it. And honestly, much like with all the other controllers we're showing off, this is decent. I'm not really trying to downplay how good this controller is. But really, I want to explain all the reasons why these ones have not been the perfect fit for me. And finally, the last example I have is this one. It's called the Nitro Deck, and this is from a company called Cracked. And this is the version 1 controller. I bought it when it first came out. They have a version 2 now, but I haven't actually got that yet. And this one is kind of neat, and it reminds me a little bit of a Steam Deck just in its overall shape and size. This will definitely turn your Switch into a very chunky boy, and I think that's pretty hilarious. Most of the controls on this are not bad either. We've got some pretty big, wide-ranging sticks, and the face buttons also feel very good. Like with the others, I think the D-pad is a little bit on the mushy side, but I think it's still pretty decent. However, I do want to make note that these triggers are pretty awful. They have an analog input to them, and they're very mushy, which makes no sense with the Nintendo Switch. The Switch itself is a digital input, which means that you do not need this full range of motion, and I just don't like the way it feels. And it's also a little bit weird because the shoulder buttons are nice and clicky, and I think that the Nitro Deck would be better served if these were clicky too. So I would say among all the solutions that I've been showing off, this has been the one that I use the least. It doesn't have pass-through charging, and it also is obviously not dockable either. Okay, with all that out of the way, now let's talk about why I like the G8 Plus so much when it comes to Nintendo Switch. Let's start with how easy it is to pair this in the first place. So all you would really need to do is go into your Switch settings, and within the controller section, just do the change grip in order. And then once you're in this section, you're going to press the Y and chicken button at the same time to turn it into Nintendo Switch pairing mode. After that, press the Bluetooth pairing button for a moment so that the red light flashes quickly, and then it will pair with the controller. It's going to look at it like a Nintendo Switch Pro controller. And after that, you're good to go. So now you can just slide it into place, and we're ready to play the Nintendo Switch. Now lately, I've been using this with my OG Switch. This is the old school one. It's got the bigger bezels on it, and it's not OLED. I've had this one since 2017, so it's like 7 years old, but it's amazing. The battery is still working really well. Now, in addition to using it with Nintendo Switch mode, you may want to swap out your buttons. As you can see here, the A, B, and XY is still the Xbox pattern. And thankfully, this is super easy to do. You can see that there's a little line right here. All you have to do is stick your thumb in there, and there's a magnetic connection, as you can see. And once you've taken off this magnetic cap, it's very easy to swap out the buttons. There's going to be a little hole on the left side, so all you have to do is get your thumbnail inside and then pull it out. So you can see there's a little indentation on one side. That's going to be the left side. From there, you can just swap out your A, B, and XY buttons. It's just a super simple thing. These are all connected magnetically as well, so it's just a very simple swap. And so there we go. Now we have the Nintendo pattern, and it's going to fit perfectly with the control scheme. One thing of note, in the G8 Plus box, like with the other G8 models, you do have different joystick caps, and you can swap these out as well. This one's a standard replacement cap, then we have a smaller version, and we also have one with a GameCube pattern as well. Personally, I just like these standard ones, but this GameCube one is kind of cool too. Now, theoretically, you would be able to change out these faceplates as well, for example, if they had different colors, but unfortunately, GameSir has not sold any just yet. So I do hope that's something that you will be able to find on their website at some point, because it would be pretty cool to be able to customize this a little bit more. The only thing you can actually change are the inner rings right here. If you see, there's a little connector between them, and if you go to the accessories page of their website, they sell sets of different rings. And it's $13 for a set, so if you wanted to have just a little pop of color right here on the inner ring, you could do that for pretty cheap. And putting it back in place is super simple. It's just magnetically connected. So there we go. So now let's talk about why this is such a perfect fit when playing your Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. The first thing is that the controller sits completely flush with the Nintendo Switch. It almost feels like this controller is made with the Nintendo Switch in mind. For example, if we look at the inner rubber bumper, you can see that it has a little bit of a lip right here about 3/4 the way up. And that also happens to be almost a perfect fit with the rail system on the Nintendo Switch. And so as you connect it with the rubber bumper, it sits 100% securely in place. It is really impressive. And so even though, yes, this is a telescopic controller, which will often feel a little bit wonky, it is the opposite experience with the GameSir G8 Plus. Even though it is absolutely two different parts, it really feels like just one. Not only that, getting the controller on and off is super simple and fast, and so if I ever just want to dock this to charge the Switch, I can just pop it in right there. In a perfect world, we'd be able to keep this in the controller and then also dock it and then also have pass-through charging, but I would say because this is so comfortable to use and so easy to take off, it hasn't been a big deal for me. Now, one nitpick I do have is that this is an analog trigger input, which is not a perfect fit for the Nintendo Switch. Now, one of the nice things about these triggers is that they will give you an immediate input when you press them down, so you don't have to go down all the way for it to register. So even in just the analog input mode, if I just barely tap it, you can see that yes, the button will show up in the testing suite. So even though this is an analog input, you don't need to press it down all the way to register, and so it hasn't really been an inhibitor in my actual gameplay. It's also worth noting that these triggers triggers can be set with a hair trigger mode as well. And the way you set this up is you press and hold the M button and the trigger at the same time for a couple seconds. It's going to flash red and vibrate. Now, every time we press the trigger, you'll see it will flash white. That means we have it in hair trigger mode. And that's not really going to matter when you're playing it with a Nintendo Switch, but for example, if you were streaming Xbox, you could then use it with a hair trigger like that. And to swap it back, you just press and hold again. It'll now flash green and then also vibrate. There are a couple other things you can program in the controller that are worth noting as well. So for example, if you press M and then up or down on the D-pad, you can adjust the vibration intensity. And there are 5 different strengths. You can turn it all the way off or just have it at 25, 50, 75, or 100%. And the vibration on here is really nice. It's got a nice kind of haptic feel to it. It feels something a little bit better than an Xbox, but not quite at like the PlayStation 5. And generally, I like to have a low amount of rumble, and so I usually will keep it at 25%, and that suited me perfectly. Another thing worth noting is that you can program these back buttons to whatever you would like, either a single button or a whole combination. So let's start by programming our back R4 button. So what you do here is you press the M button and then the R4 button and hold it for a couple seconds. After that, it's going to slowly blink white, and then you can press whatever button or combination you would like. I'm going to press the B button, then you would press the back button again. And so now every time I press the R4 button, it's going to function the same as the B button. That's going to be great with a game that's going to have a lot of jumping in it. That means that you can still jump while holding the analog sticks. And so just from an overall design and functionality standpoint, this is one of the reasons why I like the G8 Plus so much with my Switch. The controller feels like it was designed perfectly for the Nintendo Switch just in terms of overall shape. And then we can also adjust things like the physical A, B, X, Y buttons, and we can also program things like the back buttons as well as the vibration. And like I mentioned, this also has full gyroscopic controls. We've also got a couple creature comforts built into the controller. For example, if we tap on the power button, it'll turn the controller off as well. In addition, while your Switch is asleep, if you just tap on the power button, it's actually going to turn on the controller and it'll also wake the device from sleep too. It does take a couple seconds to get from sleep into this screen, but it's great that we can do that without having to press the power button. And then of course, when it comes to actual gameplay, for example, playing something like Hades, this is a wonderful experience. The analog sticks themselves feel full size, and so I have a huge range of motion and it feels really satisfying. In addition, because these buttons are a little bit more tactile and lighter to press, it just feels like a really good fit for a game where you're mashing on the buttons like with Hades. And I also appreciate the nice clicky D-pad. It allows me to basically change it up depending on the game that I'm playing. Sometimes I want to use that really precise control movement. Sometimes I just want to go ham on the analog stick. And that's the great thing about the GameSir G8 Plus is that each of these controls are good in their own way. It's also worth noting that this GameSir chicken button will function as your home button no matter what. So when you're in the middle of a game, you can tap on it, it'll bring you back to this menu. You can also press and hold and it'll bring up the sub menu if you need to adjust the brightness or the volume. In addition, this screenshot button works perfectly. So you can see there, I just took a new screen capture. And so putting it all together, I've been enjoying this controller in ways that I did not expect. I thought it was just going to be a new phone and tablet controller that happened to be wireless, but it turns out that this is the primary way I've been playing with my Nintendo Switch over the past month. And for a guy who's tested a lot of handheld devices, the fact that this controller is the one that really clicks for me when it came to Nintendo Switch, I think that says a lot. Now, to be clear, I wouldn't say it's a perfect controller, but it's a really excellent match for the way that I play. And I think there are 2 things that prevent me from saying that this is a perfect solution. The first is that it's not dockable. Now, just given the way it's set up and everything, and the fact that it's created this way so that you can use it with other things like a phone and a tablet, it totally makes sense to me that this is not a dockable solution. And like I showed, it is easy enough to just be able to pull this right out and then pop it into your Nintendo Switch. And so I haven't had any issues charging from a docked position in that regard. Now, the only other nitpick that I have is very subjective, and it only really pertains to using this with a Nintendo Switch, and that is these analog triggers. In all of the use cases, especially when using this for remote play with streaming games, you do want an analog input. Same thing with like GameCube games, Dreamcast, stuff like that. The only time I really prefer a digital input is when I'm playing it with my Nintendo Switch. And the funny thing is, probably the best solution that they could come up with is already embedded in one of their controllers. This is their latest one. This one is a wireless controller. It's called the Tarantula Pro, and it is shaped more like a PS4 controller more than anything. Now, there are many things that I'm already liking about this controller, even though I just got it a few days ago. I'm thinking about making a video about this one eventually as well. But the number one thing, at least as it pertains to this video, is that they have a hairline trigger option. We've got these little mechanical switches on the back, and by default, we'll have that full analog input. But if we switch it over, it actually turns into a very clicky experience. And so not only does it immediately click down, but it's also nice and clicky. And so I'd love to see something like this on the GameSir G8 as well. This is kind of a perfect setup when it comes to Nintendo Switch because it takes just a little bit of force to actuate the button. And then of course, flipping it back gives us that full Hall sensor analog input as well. Now there's one other feature of this controller that I really just can't wait to show, and so I'm not even going to wait for the next video. I'm just going to turn it on and show you what it can do. The thing about this controller is that it has customizable RGB light buttons. So right now in its default Xbox state, you can see that we have the Xbox colors and button layout. But if we press and hold the chicken button and the Y button for a few seconds, it'll turn off the controller and then swap it over to Nintendo Switch mode instead. And as you can see, the RGB lights switch over to this mode, and so I think that's pretty awesome. Now we have the A button on the right side, and I didn't have to change out the buttons themselves. So this controller on its own is pretty exciting. Let me know if you want to see a full video about this one too. But getting back to the G8 Plus, my big takeaway here is that this is excellent in many fronts, and one of them was pretty unexpected when it came to the Switch. So not only is this an excellent controller when it comes to using it with a phone or a tablet, but it's also amazing when it comes to the Nintendo Switch. So chances are, if you're watching one of these videos, you probably have a smartphone, and you might have a smaller tablet as well, and you likely have a Nintendo Switch. And so if you have any of those three combination, but especially if you have all three, then I think this is definitely worth it for 80 bucks. I rarely throw around the word transformative when I'm talking about an accessory, but this is one of the very few where it's doing actually that. In fact, I didn't really plan on making an in-depth video about this controller at all, but the fact that it is so good for the Nintendo Switch completely cleared out my production calendar. And honestly, that's the crux of GameSir as a controller maker in the first place. I often will underestimate their products, but once I have them in the hand and I truly start to understand their value, then I really start to appreciate them more. And I think between the GameSir G8 Galileo and the G8 Plus, I'm really starting to prefer the G8 Plus more all around. You could make some arguments about Bluetooth and input lag, but honestly, I just haven't felt that. And so even though having a direct connection is a really handy feature, the wireless on this is not bad either. And when you combine that with the fact that it gets wider so I can use it with my tablet, but then also is a perfect fit for my Switch, yeah, this one seems to be a no-brainer. And it's really just icing on the cake that I like the face buttons a little bit more as well. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you on the hunt for a good telescopic controller, and is this one meeting your needs? And if it isn't, let me know what you're looking for. I'm always on the hunt for my next favorite controller, but as it stands for right now, I think the G8 Plus is going to fill that need for quite some time. Thank you to GameSir for sending this out for review, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.